it's not going to come as a particular surprise to you that things are very polarized right now. But at this point in the timeline, where we are with the collapse of the West, there's actually no solving or reversing polarization. For the magician, the only thing left to do is get better at it, is master the energetic form of this moment and put it to good use. So I'm in the Dauntless. I did actually have grand plans to film outside on a lovely summer day, but speaking of disagreements, the weather gods disagreed. The location, it's nice, it's just... Anyway, I don't necessarily mind that much because astrologer Cam White actually just did a truck video of his own, and I was mentioned in it. His is far less ratchet than mine, but I am using Cam as an excuse to come to you from the cabin of my truck. There are so many cultural and societal polarization flashpoints right now, which is obvious, but the funny thing is none of them get to reach their conclusion before the next one comes along. The Paris Olympics was only July, okay? And in between now and then, we've had a presidential election, but not just that. One of the candidates was attempted to be assassinated, a bit fishy, not going to lie, but nevertheless, like 3 times. So if you think back to, oh yeah, July, that terrible opening ceremony that everyone got upset about, and the inevitable gender issues in the sports and so on, that wasn't that long ago. And here we are at the peak of the holiday season, which means we not only find polarization out there in the world, it's coming home literally for Christmas. It's coming home to the family, and I think we all know how that's going to turn out.
Del gobierno de Zapatero. Pues igual que yo. ¿Y qué opina usted? ¿Qué opina usted? ¿Qué opina usted del gobierno canario? ¿Y de los ayuntamientos de la isla?
So from the personal up to the global, this is what we're doing right now. We are spinning apart. And I want to show you why that is from a magical perspective. But I also want to offer some suggestions of what might be yours to do as a result. Because none of the old little human resources tricks, none of the feeling statements are going to cut it in 2025. The truck is literally shaking. Anyway, let's steelman polarization. Let's describe it in a way that, go with me on this, makes it beneficial in a society or a culture.
They stand for everything we don't stand for.
And we learn this from shadow work theory, from Jungian psychology, from any kind of psychotherapeutic process that involves parts work, which shamanically I think is completely correct, right? So you are not one being, you are an ecosystem of beings. And there's a phenomenon called polarization that happens inside someone's system. And it's defined as when your no electrifies or energizes your yes, and your yes energizes your no. Let me give you an example of what that looks like. So a friend of mine's, obviously now ex-boyfriend, told him at the outset of his studies that he won't stick with it because he never sticks with anything. Obviously, they broke up. And so this friend of mine, because the thing was he did not pick the right class. It's as simple as that. But he couldn't leave because he didn't want the version of himself in his ex's head to be true. So he stayed in a class that was not right for him. And as he stayed, the energy of the leaving got stronger. But as the energy of the leaving got stronger, the energy of the staying got stronger. We find this very often in abusive relationships where the energy for leaving and the energy for staying make each other bigger. What this is supposed to do, if you give it the room, do is allow for the emergence of what Charles Eisenstein calls the transcendent third option, and I'll tell you a little bit about that later on in the video. Future Gordon here. It's a much nicer day, as you can tell. Well, of course it is, because I'm inside editing. Anyway, talking about the shadow and the internal polarities within it, as I'm editing the video, it reminds me, I've read a book about this, and I have. It's called Meeting the Shadow. It's old-timey now. It might even be from the 80s, but there is a couple of paragraphs in it that I'm going to read you because it's on point for understanding what it is that polarity is doing within your system. Carrying such a tension of the opposites is like a crucifixion. We must be as one suspended between the opposites, a painful state to bear. But in such a state of suspension, the grace of God is able to operate within us. The problem of our duality can never be resolved on the level of the ego. It permits no rational solution. But where there is consciousness of a problem, the self, the image of God within us, can operate and bring about an irrational synthesis of the personality. To put it another way, if we consciously carry the burden of the opposites in our nature, the secret, irrational healing processes that go on in us unconsciously can operate to our benefit and work toward the synthesis of the personality. So, when we steelman polarization, what we want to say is it provides the necessary energy for a new possibility to emerge because the existing possibilities or options are not satisfactory. We know that. You know that politically. We can jump that up to a cultural level now and go, oh yeah, that's exactly what it is. Like if you're in a good mood, you can look at the other pole of a polarized political or cultural debate, trans stuff, Ukraine, Israel, whatever, right? And if you're in a good mood and you can be like, oh, actually, I can see why, not I get your perspective, but I can see why my holding of a pole that is opposite energizes your holding of that one and vice versa. Because we have a plethora of unlovely situations to live through for the rest of this decade. And if any of the old strategies would have worked, we wouldn't be in this situation.
You have made a very powerless enemy.
And so polarization emerges at the level of the psyche when you're doing shadow work, at the level of a culture when enough or sufficient energy is required for something new and unlooked for to emerge. From the shamanic healing perspective, then, polarization is evolution. It is the generation of the necessary energy for transformation. And what is yours to do, magically speaking, even if you are just magic adjacent, is to know that and to hold, and it's very, very uncomfortable. Welcome to shadow work. It's to hold the energy of your pole in the presence of its opposite pole in whatever situation you find yourself in.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Let me give you some precise details on how to do that. It's actually just a simple two-step process. 1, make the inward turn. 2, hold. Now let me give you some tips on how that might look from about a decade now of podcasting. Because when you encounter a guest who is at political or cultural or whatever variance with either yourself or the majority of your audience, you're in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, right? Because let's say you swing in and argue, I don't know what for, with a guest about the Russiagate scam or mRNA injections or what have you. If you do that, half the comments in the YouTube section will be like, dude, you had, and they'll be right, you had the guest on to talk about Amazonian plants. If you don't do it, you will have a whole bunch of comments going like, why did you just let that comment about Russia or injections or whatever just sit there. And I'm like, because I had him on or her on to talk about Amazonian plants or chakras or whatever it happened to be. My point here is that I cannot think of anything outside of emergency situations where the right thing to do is to dissipate the generated uncomfortable energy, generated discomfort through argument, through firing it back out. The goal, it's almost like a Taoist cultivation technique. In fact, it basically is exactly a Taoist cultivation technique. Hold the energy. And if you can't, there's a little bit of shadow work there for you to do as well, because it's like, oh, why am I so uncomfortable in the presence of people who don't have 100% alignment with my worldview? It's a serious question, like, why? And if you say like, whoa, because it's important for democracy to blah, 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 get out. Get out into this gale force wind and walk into the sea.
I want to roll my eyes right now, but the doctor said if I keep doing it, my ocular muscles might spasm and eject my eyeballs.
Because truly, why does it matter? And that's not a question with a universal answer. That's a question for you. It's like, oh, I am actually uncomfortable around people who I think are smart, who think differently to me because I might not be smart. It's something like that. Doesn't matter what it is. You don't even really need to know what it is. You need to know that, oh, that discomfort, it's supposed to be there. You are supposed to and are called to hold one side of a portal, a summoning spell that summons the transcendent third option, almost exactly like a magical triangle, because you have the two poles and then the transcendent third option will come through. So I learned this term from Charles Eisenstein's Substack, actually. And he was talking about, during his time on RFK Jr.'s presidential campaign, abortion, right? So that's another cultural flashpoint. And of course, RFK Jr. had to have a policy around abortion, given that it was one of the defining splits that's going on for the blue team and the red team. And what they came up with was more choice, more life. Okay, so it's obviously not preventing access in any way, shape, or form to women to exert body sovereignty, but it's also to acknowledge that in literally the majority of cases where that happens, it's because the economic situation is not appropriate to bring a child into the world. So how about we change that? That's the more life part of it. So the more choice, more life position is an invitation, an energetic summoning of a transcendent third option of how about we live in a world where women absolutely have access to any medical procedure that they deem is right for their body, but also how about we live in a world where they don't need to do that if they don't want to. So that's the transcendent third option, and it is the promise at the end of this practice. Now, I want to be clear that discomfort when you're sitting across the table from your uncle whose opinions on immigration, Ukraine, Israel, whatever, are not yours. I want to be clear that I don't mean that you sit there and tolerate any kind of abuse or any kind of attack. Like, you do need to be a little bit more mature about this, okay? This is a sophisticated process, which is to say, in those situations, it's always about checking with your system, like, am I still okay here? And if it's no, leave. Don't argue, leave.
Jonah, hey, listen, settle something for me. Okay. You like to have sex and you like to travel?
Yes, ma'am.
Then you can.
If your system has given you those boundary alerts, because let me tell you, irritation and upset in a polarized situation, think of it like a proximity alarm for, well, not my car is 150 years old, but think of it like a proximity warning in a car when you're getting too close to the lines or something else. That's what that energy is for. It's not for immediately dissipating by yelling. And you kind of understand why your system will leap in and do that, right? Like if you make a scene at the Thanksgiving dinner and then all of a sudden Thanksgiving dinner is over, one of you is ejected, and the system has got what it wanted, which is you out of that situation. That's what it's for. Nothing's going wrong there. So your job is not to sit there and take abuse. Your job is to be aware that when those feelings come up, that is what they are. A boundary hasn't necessarily been crossed, but some things are getting near it, and you just hold that pole, hold that energy, and you'll be surprised in a lot of cases, like, oh, I can hold this. And most of the time when you have parts that come up that are like, Uncle James is a fucking idiot, you can just quietly say to that part who's saying that, yeah, he is. Like, he's saying some things that I think are repugnant. You don't obviously talk that out loud because you'll get put in a home, right? But most often when your parts bring up something that is of their concern for the whole system, they actually just want to be acknowledged. So you can sit there and be like, when a part says that, like, oh man, oh man, he still watches Rachel Maddow or whatever it is, you can be like, yeah, that's dumb. Internally, just like, I agree. That is, the statements he is making right now at the table are unpleasant. Most of the time, that will be enough for that part to calm back down and allow you to remain holding that polar place. And strange as it may seem, this is even true when you are personally insulted to your face.
You know, you're about as annoying as a condom filled with fire ants. How's that for a fucking metaphor?
It's a simile, sir.
Shut your mouth, you fat girl.
It's a useful and mostly true rule of thumb that insults only upset you if they touch something in your shadow. For instance, if you say, I am a sorry excuse for an elderly Japanese woman, and the highborn families of Okinawa must shun my parents. That hasn't hit anything inside.
All right, let's get this over with ASAP. It's not gonna be easy with this big gangly piss flap over here who moves like, hey, what do you move like, Will?
I move as slowly as a Mississippi detective investigating the murder of a young black man.
That's right.
But if something lands, well, then there's part of you that thinks that statement is at least partially true. So Dr. Kelly Brogan has a, I suppose now famous process that she calls entering through the upset. And I will include a little explanation from her of how that works.
The work that could be described as emotional self-mastery is ongoing. It's probably a lifetime. And that's why I have really tried to simplify what that journey and rinse and repeat process can look like. With a little phrase I use called entering through the upset. That's my spiritual practice these days. Every time I'm upset about something, I set aside sometimes as little as 30 seconds or 90 seconds. And I literally just train my body, my system to hold the sensation of the upset. That's it. And the training is literally just creating the container, right? So what I mean by that is setting a timer, making sure sometimes I'll do it in a bathroom, making sure I have, the privacy I need just for that little window of time. And I'll focus all of my devotional attention on that sensation. Because what I used to do is have a sensation that was a trigger sensation, right? And then immediately discharge it into retaliatory, defensive, proving I'm right and good action. You might be, or somebody listening might be an avoidant, right? I'm an anxiously attached and girly, and avoidance, right? They freeze and they withdraw, right? Their energy from the situation. The mastery comes in to, the equation when you can lean into your non-dominant response and you can be with yourself the whole time, right? So it doesn't actually serve us to have an experience of freedom. What even does that mean, right? If we fundamentally cannot even be with ourselves.
Wow. So that can be modified, and you can do this sitting at a Christmas lunch table. That can be modified for an insulting situation or merely an uncomfortable, polarizing situation. From a family perspective, in a workplace, in a social setting, you can just notice what is going on inside when something like that happens. Because the more you do that and don't discharge the energy, the more the system starts to realize, oh, we're under new management. I no longer need to hijack and nope us out of situations quick, smart. And also, you don't know what that feeling is going to turn into in your system and at a societal level. And this is why it is the thing for magicians to do now. You don't know, by definition, you do not know what the transcendent third option will be for that particular situation. Because if we knew it, it would be one of the things that we polarized around. And we don't get to it. We do not summon that into being by dissipating the energy, the charge that keeps coming up as we attempt to bring in that new and far more satisfactory, more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. So it is completely okay to not have an answer, to not know what comes next. That's not what is yours to do where we are now. Yours is to provide that container for the energy so that it can alchemize. And this is very similar to what Bayo Akomolafe calls post-activism, because one of his rhetorical or I suppose magical spell statements is, what if the way we respond to the crisis is part of the crisis? And this method of holding, of containing a pole, allows you to make room for the more than human. Because what I'm talking about, making the inward turn system and so on, the spirit world is in you, right? It's in you. The gods, the spirits, the ancestors, that stuff is speaking to you on that imaginal common surface. So being able to presence your feelings as this energy and this discomfort comes up is exactly what you're supposed to be doing, to let them know that we're listening, to let them know that we have the capacity to pull in that transcendent third option. And this video is designed as a little companion to a solo show for my podcast, which I shall have linked up below. And it's about finding companionship in the understanding that there are people like you all over the world who are doing this same thing, which is different everywhere. But the same thing that they are doing is putting this moment and their life in service to the living field. So that's linked up below. And be sure also to check out the other couple of videos in this accidental end of year series about making that inner transformation to get you all shipshape and ready for 2025.
Do you recall a document shared on the J Drive titled The Jonad Files?
No, ma'am.
No, that doesn't ring a bell.
So it's not a word combining Jonah and gonad?
That is exactly what it is, and Mr. Egan knows that.
In fact, Mr. Egan, I was told that you encourage staffers to add to this glossary of abuse.
I do not, at this moment in time, recall the action, nor the document.
Okay, maybe this will jog your memory. We have some extracts. J-Rock, Jizzy Gillespie, Jack and the Giant Jackoff, Galian, Tinkerballs, Wadzilla, One Erection.
Do we have to go through all of these?
I'm not sure that I see the relevance.
The witnesses claim they held their former colleague in high regard, and I am attempting to prove otherwise.
Okay, yeah, sure. No, you can proceed.
The Pointless Giant, the 60-foot Virgin, Chimpanzee, Jonah Ono, Hagrid's Nutsack, Scrotum Pole, Transgender Formers, 12 Years a Slave to Jerking Off, Benedict Cum in His Own Hand, Guy Scraper, The Cloud Botherer, Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious Dick Cheese, Teenage Mutant Ninja Asshole, Spewbacca.
My college friends called me Tall McCartney.